I never thought I'd be starting over at 57. Life has a way of surprising you, though. I was sitting on my porch that spring morning, watching the sunrise and sipping my coffee, when Sarah walked out wearing clothes that made her look like she'd raided our daughter's college wardrobe. Going somewhere? I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. Her newly dyed purple hair caught the morning light as she adjusted her Smash the System t-shirt. Women's Consciousness Raising Group, she replied curtly. 30 years of marriage had taught me when to push and when to let things slide. This felt like a letting things slide moment. Have fun, I said, returning to my coffee. But Sarah lingered, fidgeting with her car keys. You know, Michael, sometimes I wonder if you even care about my personal growth. I set my coffee down slowly. Sarah, you've been going to these meetings for 3 months now. And I haven't said a word about it, have I? She crossed her arms, a gesture I'd seen countless times during our marriage. That's exactly the problem. You never say anything. You just sit there with your stupid coffee, acting like everything's normal. I looked at my cup. What's my coffee got to do with anything? It's not about the coffee, Michael. It's about your complacency. Our grandson's toys were scattered across the porch, remnants from Brian's visit yesterday. I picked up a small plastic dinosaur, turning it over in my hands. Sarah, what's really going on here? She threw her hands up in exasperation. What's going on is that I'm finally waking up. While you're content playing grandpa and living in this suburban prison, I'm discovering who I really am. I couldn't help but chuckle. Suburban prison? That's a new one. See? You're doing it again. Making light of everything. Would you prefer I make heavy of everything? She stormed toward her car, pausing only to shout back. This is exactly why I need these meetings. I watched her drive away, the coffee in my cup now cold. Inside, I found myself staring at our family photos on the wall. There we were at Jessica's college graduation just last year, all smiles and pride. Brian's wedding 3 years ago, Sarah beaming as she adjusted his boutonniere. Vacation photos, holiday gatherings, moments that had seemed permanent somehow. My phone buzzed. A text from Brian. Dad, is Mom okay? She just posted something weird on Facebook. I pulled up Facebook, something I rarely did. There was Sarah's post. Finally breaking free from the chains of suburban domesticity. No more living for others. Hashtag awaken, hashtag finding myself, hashtag down with patriarchy. I texted back. She's going through something, son. Let's give her space. But space wasn't what Sarah wanted. Over the next few weeks, she became more vocal, more confrontational. She started a TikTok account, of all things. Our daughter Jessica called me one evening, barely containing her frustration. Dad, have you seen Mom's latest video? She's talking about how marriage is a form of slavery. I hadn't seen it, but I wasn't surprised. Just let her work through this, Jess. Work through what exactly? She's acting like a teenager. I could hear the pain in Jessica's voice. Your mom's trying to find herself. Well, I wish she'd look somewhere else. She's embarrassing herself and us. The changes kept coming. Sarah joined a radical dance therapy group. She started wearing clothes that made her look like she was headed to a music festival. Our quiet dinners together became lectures about systemic oppression. I tried to be supportive, really, but then came the Miami trip. I need to go on a spiritual retreat, she announced one morning. In Miami? The location doesn't matter, Michael. It's about the journey. I nodded, pretending not to notice the new suitcase she'd bought, or the new swimsuits, or the fact that she'd never mentioned spirituality once in 30 years. A week later, the photos appeared on Instagram. Sarah on a yacht, surrounded by 20-somethings. Sarah at a beach club, dancing on tables. Sarah with a young man named Tyler, his arm around her waist. Brian called me immediately. Dad, this is insane. Mom's out there acting like she's on spring break. I stared at the photos, feeling something between amusement and despair. Well, She always did say she regretted not traveling more in her youth. This isn't funny, Dad. But what else could I do but laugh? When Sarah returned, tanned and wearing beaded bracelets, she didn't even try to explain. Instead, she announced she was moving out. I need my own space, Michael. A place where I can truly be myself. I watched her pack, methodically removing herself from our life together. And who is yourself, Sarah? She paused, holding one of her old sweaters. Someone who's been sleeping for 30 years. Someone who's finally waking up. Funny, I thought you were someone who was married with 2 kids and a grandson. She threw the sweater in the donation pile. That's exactly the problem. I'm not just a wife and mother. I'm a warrior soul. I bit back a smile. A warrior soul who still wants me to pay the phone bill. She didn't appreciate that. The day she left, I sat in my living room, surrounded by the spaces where her things had been. Jessica came over with pizza and wine. You okay, Dad? I looked at my daughter, so worried about her old man. I'm okay, Jess. Sometimes life takes unexpected turns. Mom's lost her mind. Maybe. Or maybe she's just lost. We ate pizza and watched old movies like we used to when she was little. But Sarah wasn't done surprising us. A week after moving out, she started a YouTube channel. Breaking Free with Sarah became her platform for sharing her journey of awakening. Her first video went viral in our small community. I spent 3 decades being the perfect wife, ND mother, she declared to the camera. I cooked, I cleaned, I attended PDA meetings. And what did I get in return? A life half lived. Jessica called me crying after watching it. How can she say that? How can she act like we were some kind of burden? I wished I had an answer for her. Sarah's transformation continued at full speed. She moved into a downtown loft with exposed brick walls and started hosting liberation circles. Her social media followers grew. She began dating Tyler, the 27-year-old from Miami. He was a spiritual guide and social media influencer, whatever that meant. In one of her videos, she introduced him as her soul partner. Tyler understands the divine feminine energy, she explained to her viewers. Unlike my ex-husband, who only understood lawn maintenance and stock portfolios. I had to admit that one stung a little. Brian was furious when he saw it. Dad, why aren't you angry? Why aren't you fighting back? I was sitting in my workshop, fixing an old clock. What would be the point, son? The point would be standing up for yourself. I adjusted my reading glasses, focusing on the delicate gears. Your mother's not really attacking me. She's fighting something inside herself. Brian threw his hands up, just like his mother used to. That's such a cop-out, Dad. Maybe it was. But I'd learned long ago that anger rarely solves anything. Besides, I was too busy being a grandfather to waste energy on bitterness. Brian's son, little Tommy, had just started walking. Watching him toddle around my workshop brought more joy than any amount of righteous anger could. Sarah missed Tommy's first steps. She was at a Reclaiming Your Power retreat in Sedona. When Brian sent her the video, she replied with a long message about how grandmother expectations were another form of patriarchal control. That was the moment Brian blocked her on social media. I'm done, he told me. She can live whatever life she wants, but she doesn't get to pretend my son is some tool of oppression. I understood his anger, but I also remembered the Sarah who had rocked Brian to sleep every night, who had kissed every scrape and bruise, who had been, for most of her life, a wonderful mother. That Sarah was still in there somewhere, lost beneath purple hair dye and new age slogans. But there, the divorce papers arrived on a Tuesday. I signed them without drama. Sarah had her lawyer deliver them to my lawyer. She was too busy with her authentic life journey to do it herself. That night, I sat on my porch again, in the same spot where this had all started. The spring evening was quiet. Tommy's toys were still scattered around. I picked up that same plastic dinosaur. Life has a way of surprising you. Sometimes it breaks things you thought would last forever. Sometimes it forces you to start over when you least expect it. But as I sat there, watching the sunset paint the sky in color. As Sarah would probably call spiritually aligned. I realized something important. This wasn't an ending. It was just a different kind of beginning. I just didn't know it yet. The first real test came when Jessica announced her engagement. Mark was a good kid, an architect with a steady job and kind eyes. "Dad, we want a small wedding," Jessica said over Sunday dinner. "Just family and close friends." I nodded, already anticipating the question that would come next. "And we're not sure about inviting Mom." I set down my fork carefully. "She's still your mother, Jess. A mother who's currently living with a guy younger than me and making TikToks about how marriage is oppressive." She had a point. Sarah's latest videos had become increasingly bizarre. Just last week, she'd posted one about decolonizing love while doing yoga in her loft. Tyler could be seen in the background, burning sage and nodding seriously. "It's your wedding," I told Jessica. "Your choice." She pushed her food around her plate. "Mark thinks we should invite her. Says we might regret it if we don't." "Mark sounds wise." "He is," Jessica smiled. "That's why I'm marrying him." The engagement party was set for the following weekend. That's when I met Grace. She was Mark's mother, a kindergarten teacher with laugh lines around her eyes. "So you're the famous Michael," she said, extending her hand. "Famous. Mark says you're the most level-headed person he's ever met." I laughed. Low bar these days. She had a way of making everything feel lighter. When Sarah showed up uninvited, wearing a crystal pendant and flowing robes, Grace somehow managed to defuse the situation before it became a scene. "Interesting necklace," she said smoothly, steering Sarah away from the cake. "It's for spiritual protection," Sarah declared loudly. "How fascinating. Tell me more about that while we get some fresh air." I watched them walk to the garden, Grace nodding patiently as Sarah expounded on crystal energy. Jessica appeared at my elbow. "Grace is pretty amazing, huh?" "She handled that well." I agreed. "She's single, you know." I gave my daughter a look. "Jessica, what?" "I'm just saying. She gardens, she bakes, she's great with kids. And I'm still technically married to your mother. The divorce will be final next month." I sighed. "Let's focus on your wedding, okay?" But I found myself watching Grace throughout the evening. The way she laughed, how she remembered everyone's names. The gentle authority she used to keep Sarah from starting any of her liberation ceremonies. Later, as guests were leaving, Grace helped me clean up. "Thank you," I said, "for earlier, with Sarah." She smiled, gathering empty plates. Teachers learn to handle all sorts of situations. Even crystal-wearing ex-wives. Especially those. We worked in comfortable silence for a while. "It must be hard," she said finally. "What's that?" "Watching someone you loved become someone else entirely." I paused, a stack of plates in my hands. "Sometimes I think the hardest part is remembering who she used to be." Grace nodded. "The memories make it real." Exactly. We finished cleaning in that same comfortable silence. As weeks passed, wedding preparations took over everything. Jessica and Mark wanted a garden ceremony. Grace offered her backyard, a beautiful space filled with flowering trees and winding paths. "It's perfect," Jessica declared when she saw it. I found myself spending more time there, helping with preparations. Grace taught me about pruning roses. I fixed her creaky garden gate. We shared coffee on her patio, talking about everything and nothing. Sarah, meanwhile, had taken to documenting her pre-wedding journey online. "My daughter is embracing the very institution that oppresses us," she announced to her followers. "But as an enlightened being, I choose to support her descent into societal conformity." Brian sent me the video with a string of angry emojis. I watched it while sitting in Grace's garden, the scent of roses around me. "Your ex-wife is quite the performer," Grace said, bringing out fresh coffee. "She always did have a flair for drama. Just used to be more contained." Grace sat beside me, her gardening gloves still on. You know what I think? What's that? I think she's scared. I looked at her questioningly. All this performance, all these declarations, she's terrified of being ordinary. I never thought of it that way. The funny thing is, I said slowly, she was never ordinary. Grace pulled off her gloves. Tell me about her. The old Sarah. So I did. I told her about the Sarah who used to sing in the kitchen, who read stories with different voices for each character, who could make our kids laugh even on their worst days. Grace listened, really listened. When I finished, she touched my hand lightly. You're allowed to miss that person, you know, even while dealing with. I gestured at my phone, where Sarah's latest video was frozen. Especially then, the wedding date grew closer. Sarah's posts became more frequent, more frantic. She announced she'd be bringing Tyler and his energy healing drum circle to the ceremony. Jessica put her foot down at that. Mom can come, but no drums, no crystals, no sage burning, and absolutely no Tyler. Sarah didn't take it well. Her next video was a tear-filled rant about generational trauma and the suppression of authentic expression. Grace helped Jessica write a firm but kind email setting boundaries for the wedding. I watched them work on it together, my daughter and this woman who had somehow become essential to all of us. You're good at this, I told Grace later. At what? Making difficult things easier. She smiled that warm smile that had become familiar. Life's hard enough without adding extra drama. I found myself thinking about that conversation later that night, about how some people complicate everything while others have a gift for simplicity, about how sometimes the end of one thing can lead to the beginning of something better. But I wasn't ready to explore those thoughts yet. The wedding was coming, and with it, the certainty of chaos. Sarah had been surprisingly quiet for the past few days. Too quiet. She's planning something, Jessica worried. We'll handle it, Grace assured her. And somehow, hearing her say that, I believed everything would be okay. Even if Sarah showed up with her entire drum circle, even if she tried to sage the whole garden, we would handle it. Together. The night before the wedding, I couldn't sleep. I walked out to my porch, now free of toddler toys. The plastic dinosaur still sat on the railing, where I'd left it months ago. My phone buzzed. A text from Grace. Can't sleep either? I smiled in the darkness. Too much coffee, I replied. Liar. Want company? 20 minutes later, she arrived with thermoses of decaf. We sat on the porch steps, talking about tomorrow, about Jessica and Mark, about life's unexpected turns, about second chances. And as the night grew older, I realized something important. Sometimes the best things in life come after you think all the good parts are over. You just have to be brave enough to let them in. The morning of Jessica's wedding dawned clear and bright. Grace's garden was transformed, white chairs in neat rows between the roses. An arch of flowers marked where Jessica and Mark would say their vows. I was adjusting my tie when Brian arrived with Tommy. No sign of Mom yet, he reported, helping Tommy with his tiny bow tie. The day is young, I replied. Grace appeared in the doorway, looking elegant in blue. Everything's ready outside. Jessica is getting dressed. She paused, seeing me struggle with my tie. Here, let me help with that. Her fingers were gentle as she fixed my collar. There. Perfect. Our eyes met for a moment too long. Brian cleared his throat. I'm going to take Tommy to get some cookies. After he left, Grace smoothed my lapel unnecessarily. Nervous about Sarah showing up? Honestly, more nervous about this father-daughter dance. She laughed. You'll do fine. Then we heard the commotion outside. Sarah had arrived. She was wearing a flowing white dress, almost bridal, with feathers in her purple hair. Tyler trailed behind her, carrying what looked suspiciously like a drum. Oh no, Grace muttered. But before Sarah could make it past the garden gate, Grace was there, intercepting them with remarkable grace. Sarah, we're so glad you came. Tyler, I'm afraid we have limited seating. I watched in amazement as she somehow convinced Tyler to leave, all while steering Sarah toward her assigned seat in the back row. The ceremony was beautiful. Jessica looked radiant walking down the aisle. On my arm, Mark's face when he saw her. That's what love should look like. Sarah managed to stay quiet during the vows, though I saw her filming on her phone. It wasn't until the reception that things got interesting. Sarah stood up to make an unscheduled speech. Marriage, she began, swaying slightly, is an outdated institution. But Grace was there again, smoothly taking the microphone. Let's hear from the bride and groom first, shall we? Later, I found Sarah by the cake crying. She looks just like I did, she whispered. At our wedding. For a moment, I saw the old Sarah there. She looks like herself, I said gently. Sarah wiped her eyes, smearing her makeup. I don't know who I am anymore, Michael. Maybe that's okay. Maybe you don't have to know right now. She looked at me, really looked at me for the first time in months. When did you get so wise? Around the same time you started burning sage. She actually laughed at that. A real laugh, not her new performative one. Then she saw Grace approaching and her walls went back up. I should go. My followers are waiting for a live update. I watched her hurry away, tapping on her phone. Grace handed me a glass of champagne. You okay? Yeah, just remembering. She nodded. That's allowed. The father-daughter dance came next. Jessica and I swayed to What a Wonderful World. Thank you, Dad, she whispered. For what? For being my rock. For handling Mom. For everything. I hugged her closer. That's what dads are for. Over her shoulder, I saw Grace dancing with Mark. She caught my eye and smiled. Later, as the party wound down, we found ourselves in her garden again. The lights were twinkling in the trees. Music drifted softly from the reception. Want to dance? I asked. She took my hand. We moved slowly under the stars. You know, she said, life is a funny way of working out. How so? Sometimes the hard things lead us to the good things. I thought about that. About Sarah's transformation that had hurt so much. About how it led me here, dancing in a garden with Grace. You're pretty wise yourself, I said. She laughed. I have my moments. The next morning, Sarah's latest video went viral. She was crying, mascara running, talking about the death of innocence, and how watching Jessica get married had triggered her ancestral trauma. Brian sent me the link with an eye-rolling emoji, but I didn't watch it. I was too busy having breakfast with Grace, planning our next garden project, thinking about future possibilities. Sarah's journey wasn't over. She was still posting daily videos, still searching for whatever she thought she'd lost. But my journey was taking a different path, one that led through a rose garden, guided by a woman who knew how to make the difficult things easier. Jessica and Mark settled into married life. Brian's son Tommy grew bigger every day. And I learned that summit. When one door closes so hard it shakes your whole world, another one opens quietly, like a garden gate on a summer evening. Life has a way of surprising you. Sometimes it breaks things you thought would last forever. But sometimes it gives you something better, something real, something that grows slowly and surely, like roses in a well-tended garden. And if you're lucky, you get to tend that garden with someone who makes you forget about all the thorns and focus on the blooms instead. Sarah still posts her videos, still searches for her authentic self. But I've found mine in quiet moments with Grace, in Sunday dinners with our combined family, in the simple joy of watching things grow. And that's more than enough. That's everything. And